I'm Lana, a 27-year-old florist. I met my husband when he came into the shop to buy flowers for his mother for Mother's Day. I thought that was so sweet. I remember thinking, a man who loves his mother this much was a good man to have. He would be family-oriented and possibly a good husband and father. After that, I would catch glimpses of him walking to catch a cab for work in the morning, or picking up groceries at the nearby store. Honestly, I hadn't noticed him before this, but seemed to see him all the time now. Which gave me the time to observe him more closely. He always seemed pleasant and engaging while talking to the neighbors and always had a smile on his face. So, when he came back into the shop again, I was happy to see him. But it wasn't to buy flowers again, but to ask me on a date. I was shocked, but agreed. That was 3 years ago. His family was pretty old-fashioned and quite traditional when it came to marriage. It was expected that I would be a housewife and take care of my husband's family, while he worked and brought the money home for the expenses. But early on, we talked about this and he knew I was against it. I loved my job and I wanted to continue working, and he agreed. His mother, specifically, did not want to compromise on everything, so she insisted we lived with her. I fought it, but didn't want this to be the hill I died on, so reluctantly agreed. My husband, Benjamin, agreed it was temporary and we'd eventually find our own place after a few years. That way, he could save up enough money and we'd be able to buy our own house. Right away, I was filled with regret about this decision. I know I must have had some fantasy in my head about my mother-in-law when I first saw my husband coming into the shop to buy her flowers. I later learned he was not buying it out of love, but out of obligation. He had no choice. If he dared let a day go by without outwardly showing his love for her, all hell would break loose. She was petty and materialistic and, quite frankly, mean. My father-in-law Joe acted as if her behavior was normal. Maybe because he was partly to blame for her unrealistic view on life and things and material. It had nothing to do with love, just an obligatory thing that was done to shut her up. My husband just followed suit and did the same. And now that I was living with them, I was expected to do it too. Give and shut up about it and no complaining allowed. Although Benjamin and my plan was to live with my in-laws for a few years and eventually get our own house, we were unable to save any substantial amount of money, since his mother's monetary needs were insatiable. Her spending habits were unmanageable and no one said anything about it. All she really needed from us was for us to be a working machine and keep silent. It wasn't even like she hid it from anybody. She'd walk in the house, after a long day of shopping with her friends, and brag about her newest handbag or shoes, or whatever she fancied. It had gotten so bad, when my father-in-law's stipend for the month ran out from his pension, she held her hand out to Benjamin, who had already been paying for all of the living expenses for the household. Which, I didn't object to because, at least I still had my job and we were able to have a meager savings. It only meant our dreams of buying a house would be put off a little longer than originally planned. It all went from downhill to worse when my sister-in-law got a divorce from her husband and was forced to move back into her childhood bedroom with her 8-year-old daughter. I only met her once, at our wedding, but never had a real relationship with her. She was married and living in another state when Benjamin and I met and married. For the most part, she seemed pleasant enough. Benjamin never really talked about her or his relationship with her. But he did talk about his niece often. Immediately when they moved in, it started. My mother-in-law used this time to show her true colors. I had just gotten home from work, exhausted from standing on my feet all day, when she announced, "Betty is dealing with a hard time with the divorce. I expect you to pull your weight and help out as much as possible." "What do you mean?" "I pull my weight," I said, this a little perplexed. What else could she expect from me? I had no idea. "I mean, you need to give her an allowance. She's not working and she'll need extra money to take care of Olivia, who was my now niece. I think $500 a month is a start. If she needs more, we'll let you know." Her attitude was smug and arrogant. She said it as if it were a foregone conclusion that I would work and give my money away to my sister-in-law. I don't mind helping for a little while, but she will have to find a job and make her own money, I said to my mother-in-law. Both my mother and sister-in-law looked at me as if I spoke a foreign language. What? She's a stay-at-home mother. Do you expect her to neglect her duties to Olivia? No. That won't do. That'll be your job from now on. How do you expect me to work and care for Olivia? My sister-in-law chimed in after her mother. Besides, we're family. I shouldn't be expected to work and care for my daughter. That won't do. I was about to talk back and ask, how long do you think this arrangement will go on for, when my father-in-law yelled out. Stop complaining. This is a family matter and this is how we do things. If you don't like how things are done, you shouldn't have married my son. I was flabbergasted. I have never heard him speak more than 2 words in the whole time I lived here. But suddenly, he was yelling at me, defending these entitled leeches he called wife and daughter. I was feeling ganged up on and didn't have anyone on my side, so I remained silent and waited for Benjamin to get home to discuss it with him. But my mother and sister-in-law looked at me in a smug expression and smiled. But I felt so bad for Benjamin when he came home, looking beat and exhausted, I didn't have the courage to bring it up. I held my tongue. Instead, I made a plate for him to eat and allowed him to tell me about the hard time at work he had today. Now, the one thing that attracted me to my husband was that he was mild-mannered, calm and had a soft tone when he spoke. What I learned subsequent to our marriage, though, was he had absolutely zero backbone. That wasn't a deal-breaker for me, but it did contribute to a lot of the arguments we had. Especially since his family was so overbearing and pushy and he was mostly silent and calling for everyone to just get along. Because of this, I knew he would not find the strength to defend me against his mother and sister. And now that his father seemed to take up the banner, it was me against all of them. My husband just stayed in neutral zone, promising we'd just work diligently and save to find our own place. But this was pure fantasy. As it was, all of his money was going to living expenses, that increased since his sister and niece moved in, and all the extra money I used to have to save towards it, was being gulped up by his sister for her and Olivia's personal expenses. When in reality, we were in a never-ending trap. And true to form, my mother and sister-in-law, with Olivia in tow, would come into the house carrying mountains of shopping bags from their excursions and sprees. My father-in-law seemed to go back into his cocoon and ignore everyone to hang out with his buddies and drink and golf all day. Benjamin and I were the only ones working, and we were spent. As if to brag, my sister-in-law asked one day after their shopping spree, "Doesn't this dress look lovely on Olivia?" She saw it in the store and just had to have it. She said this with no shame or sense of contrition that she had done anything wrong. It was as if this was expected, that someone else was to take care of their financial needs and not complain about it. Why are you buying dresses? Olivia has plenty of clothes. Maybe you should have saved the money for something more practical, like daycare or study camp. When I said this, everyone looked at me. They were fuming that I made such a suggestion. Are you denying your niece something she wants? If she needs extra money for study camp, it's only a few $100s a month. You can just add it to her monthly allowance, my mother-in-law said to me. As time went on, it had only gotten worse. Soon, their shopping sprees went to full-on excursions, day trips, and spa treatments. They visited all of the fancy restaurants with their friends and spared no expense when it came to treating themselves. In all truthfulness, even if Benjamin and I worked around the clock, we could never make enough money to maintain their spending habits. Frankly, we needed to be gazillionaires. And that still wouldn't be enough. This was enough. I knew, as soon as Benjamin came home tonight, we would have to have a talk with his family. This was beginning to become a bit too much. At this rate, we wouldn't be able to start a family of our own because our finances were being drained dry with their frivolous spending. But instead of me talking to Benjamin that night, I had a talk with my mother. She had called me to inform me that my grandpa had passed away. It was a long time since I had seen him, it just seemed too inconvenient to visit. Thinking back on it, when Benjamin and I made any plans to visit my side of the family, his family would make up excuse after excuse, then before you'd know it, there would be no more money to go. Once, when we decided we wanted to go on a weekend excursion, just to get away from them, they made every reason they could think of until anything we had squirreled away for ourselves was eaten up by them and going towards one of their wasteful venture. One thing after another superseded our needs, until there was nothing left for us. I can't honestly say when it all started. It's just that now, looking back, I think it was like this from the start. But this time, nothing and no one was going to stop me from visiting my family. I grabbed 2 cheap tickets online. One for me and one for Benjamin. We didn't have to worry about hotel fees because we would be staying with family. But my sister-in-law wasn't going to get her allowance this month either. And needless to say, by the time Benjamin and I left the house it was in quite the uproar. What are we supposed to do while you're gone? What if we need to buy something? Those were the questions we got peppered with while packing to leave. Even my father-in-law tried to put a bit of pressure on us, trying to make us feel ashamed for leaving them at a time like this. Like, what? Really? I was going to my grandfather's funeral. No one even expressed their condolences to me or my family. They just thought about themselves and how they would be affected once my husband and I were gone for a few days. But, I kept silent as I packed. And finally when we boarded the plane, was I able to breathe a sigh of relief. The one thing my husband's family didn't know was, my family was pretty well off. We weren't filthy rich by any stretch, but comfortable enough to splurge and spend freely. Something his family did regularly, though they could hardly afford the luxury. I don't know why I never mentioned it to them. Maybe it was my subconscious intuition not to do so, or maybe it was because it wasn't my money to make mention of. I'm not entirely sure. But I wanted for nothing growing up, and when I became an adult I wanted to be independent and make my own way in life. So I didn't count my family's money as mine. Yet, it was during this time my husband and I realized we needed to get from under the thumb of his greedy family. If we didn't do something about it soon, we'd never have time to start our own family and would need to work until we die. He agreed with me and we came up with a plan on how to deal with his family once we returned. My grandfather's estate legally went to my mother. But seeing as she was an only child and so was I, she decided to give a small portion to me now. After all, my father was pretty well off in his own right, and they were in no need for money. But she realized my husband and I were in desperate need, though we didn't bring it up. I guess the dark circle around our eyes and ragged shoes and clothes told the story for us. The only stipulation my parents made was, we had to buy a house and put money away for our future and any future children's care and education. Otherwise, spend freely and, for God's sake, buy new clothes and shoes, my mother had said. As sad as it may sound, though it was for a sullen occasion, being away from his family and spending some much-needed time together felt like the honeymoon we never got to enjoy. So, when we returned to my in-laws' house, we must have looked refreshed because my mother-in-law made a comment about it the minute we walked into the house. I guess the trip wasn't so useless, after all. Did your grandfather have the decency to leave an inheritance? She said snidely. Yeah. How much did we get? My sister-in-law said. Even Olivia chimed in, to mine and my husband's horror. Can I get my own money? I want an allowance too, she said to us as we walked in with our luggage. We hadn't even made it to the room yet. Enough! Benjamin yelled. For the first time, he was at his wit's end. She just buried her grandfather, for Pete's sake, and all you can think about is money. Aren't you ashamed? How dare you take that tone with me? I'm your mother. Besides, what's hers is ours. She's a part of our family now. All I'm saying is, if there is any inheritance, it should rightfully go to our family now since we took her in. Don't you agree? I'm done, he said and dragged our luggage into the room and began to unpack. I followed closely behind. We were exhausted and just wanted to rest a bit before we went to work in the morning. Benjamin and I didn't want to risk talking about our plans while at the house, for fear of being overheard, so we'd meet for lunch during work. He'd pop over to the florist shop and we'd eat lunch while planning our next move. This had gone on for a couple of weeks. But we must have looked happy for his family, because their relentless barrage of questioning about the inheritance was becoming too much. One day my mother-in-law had the audacity to say, "I'll need you to put the money into my bank account as soon as possible. The girls and I are going on a trip. Since you just came back, I know you can't take off from work, so I didn't bother including you in the plans. I've already bought me and Olivia's clothes for this trip," my sister-in-law said in her chatty voice. "I have our passports ready. Paris, here we come." "Sorry you can't go," she said to me. You could tell she didn't mean it. It was an afterthought to appear to be polite. "Well, I can't afford to go to Paris," I said nonchalantly. "I hope you enjoy your trip. I don't have nearly as much free money to spend as you do." "Don't be a smart aleck. You put that money in my account no later than tomorrow. We'll need some extra spending cash too, so add another $4,000 on top of that," my mother-in-law ordered. I just held my tongue and smiled. Benjamin made me promise I wouldn't say anything while we worked towards moving out. But time was ticking by so slowly for me. They were pushing my patience. But it all came to a head when I didn't put the money in my mother-in-law's account as she had ordered me. While we were sleeping after the long days working, my father-in-law began banging on our bedroom door. It was an incessant, loud banging that startled us from our sleep. "Open up. We need to talk," he said as he pounded on the door. Benjamin opened to see his mother, father and sister standing at the door. He asked groggily, "What do you want? Can't it wait until tomorrow?" His father said loudly, "No. What's this your mother saying Lana got an inheritance and won't share it with us? Is this true?" Benjamin and I looked at each other. We never said any such thing, and it was presumptuous for them to think so. And though it was true, neither of us would ever tell them as much. "What are you talking about? There's no inheritance," Benjamin said as he wiped the sleep from his eyes. Although he was on the verge of being irritated, he had never quite made it there. He was really good at controlling his anger. It was a gift. It was something I never learned to do. "They're hiding something. They came home in a great mood. I know there's something. They're lying to us," my mother-in-law insisted. "What nonsense are you talking? Why do you insist there's an inheritance? And even if there were, it would go to my mother," I said to her. It wasn't a complete lie. But I was never going to tell them the truth or they would bleed us dry for sure. Well, she stammered. "I won't have a lazy person living off my family. If your family is only going to die and leave you nothing but poverty, well, you can just get out of here." "What good are you?" she said smugly. Benjamin said, "Fine," and slammed the door in their faces. "Wait. Benji. I don't mean you. You stay." "But she has to go," my mother-in-law began saying while banging on the other side of the door. "Benji, you must stay. Your family. Kick that selfish witch out of here. She's just a drag on our family. I'll find you another wife who's worth something." Benjamin and I ignored her as we smiled at each other while we packed. Well, he packed while I made arrangements to stay in a hotel close to our jobs for a few days. And though our situation was desperate and hopeless, being kicked out in the middle of the night with literally no place to go, we also felt relieved. When we walked out of the door, they all pounced at once. His father first, "Benji, is this how you treat your family? Your mother didn't mean you had to leave. Stay, son." His sister said, "Yeah, you don't have to leave because mom is kicking her out. Why would you want to stay married to someone who has nothing to bring to this family?" "You're so soft," she accused. If he was ever going to have a backbone, now was going to be the time. I remained silent while he dealt with his family. "You're asking what she brought to the family. What did you bring to your husband's family? Nothing but debt. That's why he divorced you. Do you think I don't know? You put him in so much debt, the poor man still working a second job to pay it all off. It's time for you to get a grip and find a job, Benjamin said to his sister. Benjamin admonished his mother by saying, "Ma, it's time for you to pitch in and help your daughter more. She's going to need you, for Olivia's sake. Stop being a burden and help more. It should pain you to see her in this situation and you're only making it worse. I pray this won't happen to Olivia in the future." Then he turned to his dad. "I appreciate you for bringing me up to be a man, but Lana is my family now. And if you don't accept her, that's okay. We're going to make our own family together. Like you and Mom did." But this, he swept his hand across the room at his mother and sister and continued, "This is your family. Mine is with Lana." Right on time, our Uber was outside and we left without another word being said. We heard through Benjamin's aunt that his sister had to finally get a job and start pulling her weight around the house. My mother-in-law was seldom seen among her friends because her money well dried up and she was the constant babysitter for Olivia while her mother worked multiple part-time jobs. My father-in-law went back to his quiet cocoon, leaving the women to fend for themselves, while he spent the bulk of his free time drinking and golfing with his buddies. A couple of times he'd go on a long hunting or fishing excursion. Benjamin and I came to realize, he didn't care what was going on in the house, as long as he didn't have to get involved. When his mother balked, he only jumped in long enough to placate her. But when Benjamin and I left, his sister has the bull's eye on her and she's now the target of her mother's wrath and bullying. As for me and Benjamin, we did as my parents asked and finally put a bid on the house we wanted. And won. Because we didn't have any furnishings beforehand, our new house is pretty bare right now. But we're happy. The first room we furnished was our bedroom. The next, our daughter's nursery. You guessed it. We're finally starting our own family now. Thanks for listening to my story. Come back for more stories and help our channel grow. Bye.